You think family is the safe haven after the storm? Think again. Sometimes, family is the origin of the hurricane, and sarcastic whispers at a lavish wedding carry more lethal force than a stray bullet. For 38 years, I chose silence not out of weakness, but because my words possess the exact weight to crush an empire built on pure hypocrisy. Buckle up. What you will witness is a flawless overthrow bringing the arrogant to their knees. Hello, dear listeners of Haley Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for tuning in today with such open hearts. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating and bringing you the content you love. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can pay for their living expenses and continue creating these thrilling revenge stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the video description and pinned comment. My name is Nora Perry, and I am 38 years old. The winter wedding was taking place at one of the most exclusive, hyper-luxurious ski resorts in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. Crystal chandeliers suspended from vaulted wooden ceilings cast fractured, glittering light across the grand ballroom. The relentless, sharp popping of champagne corks echoed through the space, serving as the rhythmic heartbeat for the ultra-rich to parade their immense wealth. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of white roses and imported truffles. Waiters in crisp white uniforms glided across the marble floor, carrying silver trays loaded with hors d'oeuvres that cost more than what most Americans earned in a whole month. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the snow-capped peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains loomed in the darkness, a harsh wilderness standing in stark contrast to the fragile, heated bubble of extreme wealth inside. It was a curated exhibition of the American elite, and I stood completely still, tucked away in the shadows at the edge of the mahogany bar. I wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress. It fit the strict dress code just enough to avoid causing a scene, yet it left my arms exposed. On my right wrist, a pale, jagged scar interrupted the smooth skin. It was a quiet souvenir from a classified extraction mission in the Middle East, a story I would take to my grave. Around me, the air smelled of expensive perfume, but all I felt was the familiar, exhausting hypervigilance that had kept me alive for the past decade. Just a few feet behind me, Chloe, my new sister-in-law, held court with her flock of bridesmaids. Chloe was the pampered heiress of a massive commercial real estate dynasty, and she wore her arrogance as easily as her custom diamond necklace. She did not bother to lower her voice. Her tone was sharp, laced with the kind of casual cruelty only the exceedingly privileged could muster. "Look at her standing there," Chloe whispered loudly to a bridesmaid, ensuring the biting words would drift directly over my shoulder. "She is just a lowly IT worker bee for the government. Marcus told me she barely makes enough to pay her rent. It is honestly pathetic. She probably only showed up today to drink top-shelf liquor on my father's dime and pretend she belongs in this kind of luxury for one night." Chloe's giggling cohort leaned in closer. "I heard her dress is literally off the rack," one of them sneered. Chloe laughed softly. "Oh, absolutely. Marcus begged me to let her come. I told him it was fine, but honestly, it is embarrassing to have a sister-in-law who probably clips coupons just to survive in Washington. She is just a sad little government drone." Every single word was designed to be overheard, a calculated strike meant to establish the pecking order. I calmly signaled the bartender. "Just a glass of tap water, please," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. I took the cold glass and let their mockery wash over me, completely unfazed. You learn to maintain an absolute sub-zero calm when you work for the Meridian Remote Intelligence Organization. Meridian did not exist on any official United States government ledger, tax record, or congressional budget report. We were a shadow agency. We operated in the dark spaces between borders, executing black ops that the president would officially deny ever authorizing. I was not a woman who fixed frozen laptops or reset network passwords. I was an operative trained to navigate the most hostile environments on the planet. I had broken international laws to keep my country safe, and I had bled out on foreign soil. Therefore, standing here, sipping tap water while a woman whose greatest life achievement was being born rich insulted my fake career, felt entirely surreal. Enduring the petty high school drama of a spoiled billionaire heiress was child's play compared to negotiating hostage releases with armed warlords. Suddenly, Marcus brushed past me. My older brother, the groom, looked impeccable in his bespoke tuxedo. Marcus had always been the golden child, the ambitious son who promised to elevate our family name. But underneath that tailored suit is a man built of hollow ambitions and fragile pride. When he rushed by, his expensive cologne could not mask the sour scent of his anxiety. For a split second, our eyes met. Instead of the warmth of a brother who had just tied the knot, his gaze darted away in a flash of sheer panic. He wrapped one arm around my shoulder in a hurried, agonizingly superficial hug. "Glad you could make it, Nora," Marcus mumbled, his voice tight, already pulling away before the embrace even truly registered. "I have to go mingle with the VIPs at table 1. Go grab some food, okay? Just try to blend in." He did not wait for my answer. He practically sprinted off to act as the subservient escort for his new wife's very important people. He was terrified of me being seen, terrified that my mundane, supposedly poverty-stricken presence would somehow tarnish his shiny new brand. He had spent the last 3 years building a pristine facade, and I was the dirty secret he desperately wanted swept under the rug. A profound wave of isolation settled over me as I watched him grovel before Chloe's father, his spine curved in absolute submission. The cold realization hit me harder than the winter wind outside. My family did not just tolerate the narrative of the failed, boring, unremarkable Nora. They actively craved it. They loved the version of me that was a total disappointment. It made their mediocre achievements seem monumental. If I was the sad, broke spinster, then Marcus was the triumphant, successful patriarch. They never bothered to wonder why I never asked them for money, or why I always seemed to disappear for months at a time. They needed me to be the impoverished civil servant staring at a computer screen in a dreary cubicle. My supposed failure provided the perfect contrasting backdrop for their success, allowing them to feel infinitely superior. They preferred that comfortable lie, rather than ever stopping to ask what I actually did during those long, silent months deployed in the shadows. They wanted a stepping stone, not a sister. The ambient noise in the ballroom suddenly shifted. It was not a complete cessation of sound, but a distinct, heavy change in the atmospheric pressure. The suffocating sea of expensive silk, velvet, and tailored wool miraculously parted. The guests, who usually spent their entire lives eager to take up space and demand constant attention, instinctively stepped back, their shoulders shrinking as they created a wide, clear path straight through the center of the room. Down this newly formed aisle strode the guest of honor invited by the father of the bride, Marine General Nathaniel Vance. He was a living military legend, a man whose reputation preceded him by thousands of miles. He did not walk, he advanced. Every single step was measured, deliberate, carrying the heavy gravitational pull of absolute authority. His dress uniform was immaculate, adorned with neat rows of ribbons and medals that told a silent, brutal history of bloodshed, tactical brilliance, and unwavering command. But it was his eyes that truly demanded submission. They were a piercing, fiery gray, assessing every angle of the room with the lethal, unblinking precision of an apex predator. In a room full of arrogant men who firmly believed their massive bank accounts made them invincible, General Vance served as a stark, physical reminder of what real, terrifying power actually looked like. I watched from my shadowy corner as Chloe practically vibrated with raw ambition. This was her moment. This was the ultimate prize for her social collection. She quickly shoved her crystal champagne flute into the hands of a nearby bridesmaid and rapidly smoothed the front of her custom designer gown. I could see the exact, calculated second she calibrated her facial expression, switching seamlessly from the arrogant sneer she had just aimed at me to a brilliant, impeccably constructed diplomatic smile. It was a masterpiece of manufactured warmth. She rolled her shoulders back, lifting her chin to display the perfect angle of her jawline, and stepped gracefully into the open path. She was ready to intercept him, eager to introduce herself as the beautiful, charming bride, desperately hoping to secure the general's favor and add his formidable influence to her family's extensive political portfolio. General Vance held an unlit premium Cuban cigar in his left hand and a heavy crystal glass of dark amber whiskey in his right. He slowed his commanding pace slightly, offering a polite, minimal nod to the wealthy sycophants who were visibly clamoring for his attention. He began to raise his glass, preparing to offer a perfunctory, polite toast to the crowded room. But before the rim could reach his lips, his sweeping, tactical gaze continued its routine scan across the dim edges of the ballroom. His eyes passed over the glittering socialites, over the massive, melting ice sculptures, and over Chloe, who was now just 5 feet away with her manicured hand eagerly extended in greeting. Then, his gaze hit the mahogany bar. It hit the shadows. It hit me. Time seemed to fracture, slowing down to an agonizing, syrupy crawl. The transformation on his face was microscopic, but absolute. The politely detached mask of a senior military officer enduring a civilian social function shattered entirely. The steel muscles in his jaw locked instantly, grinding with sudden tension. His battle-hardened features froze in sheer disbelief. From his relaxed grip, the expensive cigar slipped out completely. It hit the polished marble floor with a quiet, dull thud, the gold band around it rolling uselessly against the stone. In the sudden, eerie quiet of my own heightened perception, that tiny sound echoed like a heavy gavel striking solid wood. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. The general did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. The polite wedding guest vanished, replaced instantly by the battlefield commander. He violently shoved his own armed Secret Service detail aside, completely disregarding all security protocols, and marched with aggressive, unstoppable purpose directly toward my secluded corner. Chloe stood right in his direct trajectory, her hand still gracefully extended, her smile beaming with eager anticipation. Vance did not even blink at her. He bypassed her so closely, with such forceful momentum, that the draft of his movement made the heavy silk of her wedding dress flutter wildly, leaving her outstretched hand hanging completely useless and ignored in the cold air. He stopped precisely 2 feet in front of me. He snapped his heavy boots together. His broad shoulders squared perfectly, his spine going ramrod straight. The towering legend of the United States military lowered his head slightly, his rigid posture radiating pure deference. When he spoke, his voice dropped into a deep, gravelly tone laced with an unmistakable, profound reverence that carried through the sudden quiet of the room. "Commander Perry, I did not expect to see you in the civilian world." The words fell like heavy stones into a stagnant pond. Total, suffocating silence descended upon our entire section of the ballroom. The distant string quartet seemed to fade into absolute nothingness. Chloe stood completely petrified. Her carefully crafted diplomatic smile was now morbidly frozen on her lips, her eyes wide with a potent mixture of profound shock and stinging humiliation. Across the room, I caught sight of Marcus. He was frozen mid-stride, a glass of red wine halted awkwardly near his chest. Deep, jagged wrinkles of pure, unadulterated confusion and dawning terror were already carving their way across his sweaty forehead. The power dynamic of the room had not just shifted, it had completely inverted. The silence in the ballroom did not last. It quickly fractured into 1,000 frantic, overlapping whispers, spreading through the opulent space like a grease fire. The high society guests, who just moments ago had completely ignored my existence, were suddenly craning their necks, their eyes wide with a ravenous, desperate curiosity. The rigid social hierarchy they so deeply worshipped was glitching right before their eyes. I did not flinch under the sudden spotlight. I slowly raised my simple glass of tap water and gently tapped it against the crystal rim of General Vance's untouched whiskey. The sharp, clear chime rang out above the murmurs, a sound as definitive as a judge's gavel. Chloe could not process the scene unfolding in front of her. Her meticulously planned narrative of the superior bride and the pathetic sister-in-law was disintegrating into dust. Panic flared violently in her heavily mascaraed eyes. She practically scrambled forward, her high heels catching slightly on the hem of her outrageously expensive gown. She forced a strained, agonizingly unnatural laugh that sounded more like a dying bird than a blissful bride. "Oh, General Vance," she chirped, desperately trying to inject her usual condescending sweetness into the tense air, attempting to wrestle back control of her hijacked spotlight. "You must have the wrong person entirely. This is just Nora. She just fixes computers in some obscure, tiny government office. She is a low-level IT worker. There is absolutely nothing special about her." General Vance did not look at her immediately. He took a slow, deep breath, his massive chest expanding as if the sheer magnitude of her ignorance was physically offensive to his lungs. Then, he pivoted slowly. His fiery gray eyes locked onto Chloe's pale, trembling face with the lethal, mechanical precision of a drone strike. The temperature around them seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Fixes computers?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low, completely stripped of all polite civilian civility. "Fixes computers? Listen to me very carefully, young lady. Commander Perry and her team pulled 12 of my elite Marines back from the dead at the hostile border of a country you do not even know how to pronounce. She bled out in the dirt so my men could breathe. Do not ever speak of her with that tone in my presence again." The collective gasp from the surrounding sycophants was loud and completely undisguised. The precise psychological shift in the crowd was darkly fascinating to witness. The same people who had snickered at my off-the-rack dress were now staring at me with a sickening blend of awe and absolute terror. They were social parasites, conditioned to always attach themselves to the biggest source of power in the room, and right now, their internal compasses were spinning wildly out of control. Their hypocrisy was a palpable, foul-smelling thing in the air. Suddenly, the crowd violently parted again. Marcus shoved his way through the stunned onlookers. His face was the color of old parchment, completely drained of blood. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own execution warrant. He did not say a single word of greeting or respect to the general. Blinded by sheer panic, he grabbed my upper arm with a painful, bruising grip and yanked me forcefully toward the heavy French doors leading out to the terrace. The freezing Nevada wind slammed into us as he dragged me onto the snow-covered balcony, desperately slamming the thick glass doors shut behind us to muffle the commotion. The sudden biting quiet of the winter night was a stark contrast to the buzzing, confused hive inside. I coldly wrenched my arm out of his frantic grasp, taking a deliberate step back. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and the final ugly piece of the puzzle clicked into place. His overwhelming terror was not just about my classified identity being exposed. It was about his own survival. I realized in that freezing moment the sheer, breathtaking magnitude of the fabrication he had fed his wealthy new in-laws. He had built a flawless, impenetrable fortress of lies around his own history. He had completely erased the absolute truth of how his crumbling real estate empire had miraculously survived the brink of total bankruptcy exactly 3 years ago. He had sold himself to Chloe's billionaire family as a self-made, invincible titan of industry, completely burying the pathetic, desperate reality of what had actually saved him from ruin. Before Marcus could utter a single pathetic excuse to justify his rough handling, the French doors flew open again, crashing against the exterior wall. Chloe burst onto the balcony, completely oblivious to the freezing cold biting at her bare shoulders. She was trembling violently, but not from the winter chill. She was vibrating with pure, hysterical, narcissistic rage. She could not fathom a universe where she was not the absolute center of attention on her wedding day. "What is going on here?" she shrieked, her carefully styled hair whipping wildly in the unforgiving wind. Tears of absolute frustration streamed down her face, carving tracks through her perfect makeup. She refused to accept that she had been overshadowed by the woman she deemed inferior. "How much did you pay him?" she screamed, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my face. "How much did you pay that man to come in here and put on this ridiculous act? You hired an actor to pretend you are some kind of war hero just to humiliate me on my wedding day. You are psychotic, Nora. You are completely psychotic and jealous of my life." Her delusion was so absolute, so incredibly insulated by a lifetime of wealth and yes-men, that her brain simply rejected reality in favor of a conspiracy theory that kept her as the ultimate victim. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply looked at Marcus, who was cowering against the stone railing of the balcony. The powerful, successful groom was visibly shrinking, his eyes darting frantically between his hysterical new bride and the sister he had tried to bury. He lacked the spine to correct her, and he lacked the courage to look me in the eye. The cracks in his perfect billion-dollar lie were spreading fast, and the foundation was ready to collapse. Chloe's hysterical accusations faded into a dull, meaningless drone in the background. I turned my face away from her contorted, screaming features and looked out into the pitch-black night. Thick, heavy flakes of snow were falling silently from the dark Nevada sky, settling onto the stone railing of the balcony. The freezing air stung my cheeks, but the physical cold was nothing compared to the sudden, suffocating plunge into the memories I had tried so desperately to bury. Staring into the endless, swirling white abyss, the pristine resort vanished completely. Suddenly I was no longer standing in a luxury ski lodge. I was dragged backward, exactly 3 years into the past, submerged in the suffocating, humid darkness of a memory that tasted like copper and cordite. It was exactly 4 o'clock in the morning when my encrypted secure line had violently buzzed. That phone was never supposed to ring with a civilian contact. But when I answered, I did not hear the disciplined voice of a handler or a tactical commander. I heard the pathetic, gut-wrenching sound of a grown man hyperventilating, sobbing uncontrollably into the receiver. It was Marcus, my golden brother, the rising star of the commercial real estate world, was weeping like a terrified child. Through his frantic gasps, the ugly, rotting truth of his so-called empire spilled out into the dark room. His flagship development project had not been a stroke of brilliant financial strategy. It was a massive, sinking ship. Desperate to keep the illusion of his success alive, Marcus had bypassed traditional banks and sought funding in the deepest, most dangerous shadows. He had taken a massive loan of dirty money from a ruthless South American cartel to keep his construction sites operational. He thought he could outsmart men who decapitated their rivals for sport. He was horribly wrong. When the compounding interest crushed him and he missed a crucial payment, the cartel did not send a strongly worded letter. They snatched his chief architect right off the street in broad daylight, dragging him across the border to be held as a bleeding, tortured hostage in a heavily guarded compound. Marcus had called me because he was a dead man walking. If the police found out, he would spend the rest of his life in federal prison for international money laundering and conspiracy. If he did nothing, the cartel would execute the architect, and then they would come for Marcus to collect their pound of flesh. He begged me. He invoked our dead parents. He swore on his own life that he would change, that he would do anything if I just saved him. Family is a dangerous vulnerability. Against every single protocol, against my sworn oaths, and against my own better judgment, I answered his plea. I had to overstep my authority entirely. I hijacked Meridian's highly classified underground network, manipulating satellite feeds and forging deployment orders. I personally led an unauthorized Black Book tactical team deep into an unforgiving, hostile jungle zone to execute a ghost extraction. We breached the compound in the dead of night. The firefight was brutally intense, a chaotic blur of muzzle flashes and deafening gunfire. We dragged the broken architect out of a concrete cell and secured his return. But the blood debt still remained. To permanently sever the cartel's grip on my brother and erase the hit on his head, I had to personally guarantee and wipe out a staggering debt of exactly $2 million. The cost of that single night shattered my life. The physical toll was the easiest to bear. The shrapnel that tore through my right wrist left a permanent, jagged scar, a daily reminder of my blind loyalty. But the professional and financial devastation was absolute. When Meridian Command discovered my unauthorized operation, I faced a merciless, agonizingly thorough internal investigation. I was stripped of my security clearance and placed on a brutal 6-month suspension without pay, interrogated under glaring lights by men who treated me like a traitor. To protect Marcus from being exposed and prosecuted by my own agency, I claimed the operation was a rogue asset retrieval. To balance the operational damages and satisfy the cartel's massive ledger, I liquidated my entire life savings. Every single cent I had earned from a decade of bleeding for my country, my retirement funds, my emergency accounts, completely wiped out to zero. I paid $2 million of my own blood money to buy my brother a second chance at life. The howling wind on the balcony snapped me back to the present. Chloe had finally stopped screaming. Her throat was raw, and she stood with her arms crossed tight against her chest, glaring at me with absolute venom, waiting for an explanation she would never comprehend. Marcus cautiously stepped forward, placing himself between me and his furious bride. He reached out, his trembling hands hovering just inches from my coat, terrified to actually touch me. "Nora, please," Marcus whispered. His voice was trembling, a pathetic, reedy sound barely audible over the wind. His eyes were wide, silently pleading with me to maintain the colossal lie. "Please, you cannot say anything to them. You have to stay quiet. I had to do it. I had to protect the family's face. If Chloe's parents knew the truth about the bankruptcy, about the cartel, they would have completely destroyed me. They would have called off the wedding. I needed this alliance to survive. Please, Nora, just be the quiet sister. Do it for the family." I stood perfectly still, letting the freezing snow settle on my hair. I looked at the man standing in front of me. I searched my heart for even a single ember of anger, but I found absolutely nothing. The rage had burned itself out long ago, leaving behind a cold, desolate wasteland of bone-chilling contempt. I stared at his perfectly styled hair, his tailored designer tuxedo, and the expensive watch ticking uselessly on his wrist. He was standing in a fortress of wealth that I had paid for with my flesh, my career, and my entire future. He had climbed out of a grave by using my spine as a ladder. And now, draped in the luxurious spoils of my silent sacrifice, he was begging me to swallow my pride and let his arrogant wife treat me like dirt on the bottom of her shoe, all to protect his pathetic, hollow reputation. He did not care that I had lost everything. He only cared that his tuxedo remained spotless. The sheer, breathtaking selfishness of his plea did not enrage me. It simply finalized his execution in my eyes. The transition back into the grand ballroom felt like stepping from a freezer directly into a suffocating oven of forced joviality. The orchestra had been replaced by a slick, fast-talking auctioneer. The wedding had smoothly transitioned into its next phase of scheduled arrogance, the luxury charity auction. This was the ultimate playground for the ultra-rich to aggressively flaunt their disposable income under the thin, righteous veil of philanthropy. I stood in my quiet corner, watching as bidding paddles shot into the air, driving the prices of trivial items to astronomical heights. A week on a private yacht in the Mediterranean went for $300,000. A private dinner with a celebrity chef closed at $150,000. The air was thick with the toxic scent of egos colliding and checkbooks opening. But Chloe was not satisfied. The humiliation she had suffered when General Vance bypassed her was still burning a hole in her fragile pride. She needed a victory, a public execution to reestablish her absolute dominance in her own social kingdom. I saw her whispering fiercely to the auctioneer, handing him a hastily scribbled note. She then grabbed the silver microphone, her knuckles white from her vice-like grip. She plastered on a radiant, devastatingly fake smile that stretched the corners of her mouth tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests," Chloe announced, her voice echoing shrilly through the massive sound system. "Before we conclude this wonderful evening of giving back, we have one final, very special, impromptu item. We all know how important it is to support the working class, especially those who toil away in obscurity to keep our country running." She paused, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me with pure, venomous triumph. "Therefore, my lovely new sister-in-law, Nora, has graciously agreed to offer a unique experience. We are auctioning off a full day of shadowing a real, humble government IT worker. You can learn how to fix a frozen keyboard or change a router cord in a dreary basement office. It is a fantastic opportunity to see how the other half barely survives. Let us start the bidding at a very accessible $50. Who will give me $50 for charity?" The ballroom erupted. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a roaring, malicious wave of outright mockery. Hundreds of wealthy guests threw their heads back, laughing at the sheer audacity of the gag. A few men in the front row jokingly raised their paddles, loudly shouting out bids of $51 and $52, treating my entirely fabricated existence as the punchline to the greatest joke ever told. The cruelty was palpable, a heavy, suffocating blanket of collective contempt. I did not blush. I did not avert my gaze. I did not let a single muscle in my face twitch. I stood absolutely still, radiating a cold, impenetrable calm. My eyes bypassed the laughing crowd, bypassed Chloe's triumphant sneer, and locked directly onto Marcus. My brother was standing near the towering wedding cake, his face pale and sickly. Instead of defending me, instead of stopping the horrific public humiliation of the woman who had saved his life, he slowly turned his head away. He stared intensely at his expensive Italian leather shoes, pretending he was completely deaf to the mockery. His cowardice was absolute. Suddenly, a sound like a gunshot violently shattered the laughter. General Nathaniel Vance had risen from his VIP table. In his massive hand, he gripped a heavy brass-tipped wooden walking cane, a souvenir from a tour in Afghanistan. He had slammed the brass tip down onto the polished mahogany floorboards with such explosive, brutal force that the wood actually splintered. The sharp crack echoed through the cavernous hall, instantly slicing through the mockery. "I bid $2 million, General Vance roared. His voice was a sonic boom of pure, unadulterated command. It hit the room with the force of a physical blow. The laughter died instantly, choking in the throats of the elite. The auctioneer dropped his gavel, his jaw hanging open in sheer disbelief. The entire ballroom froze, plunging into a silence so absolute, so heavy, it felt as though the oxygen had been entirely sucked out of the room. The men who had been shouting $52 suddenly looked violently ill. General Vance did not wait for the auctioneer to respond. He marched methodically toward the stage, his boots pounding a steady, terrifying rhythm against the floor. He stepped up onto the platform, towering over Chloe. He reached out and snatched the microphone directly from her trembling hands. She did not resist. She looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Vance turned his imposing frame to face the bride's horrified family, and then he swept his fiery gaze across the entire stunned audience. $2 million, the general growled, pronouncing every single syllable with lethal precision. That is not a random number pulled from thin air. $2 million is the exact amount that Commander Perry paid out of her own pocket. It is the life savings she completely liquidated, the blood money she surrendered. To buy back the pathetic life and the fake honor of the absolute coward standing over there in the groom's tuxedo. He pointed directly at Marcus. The crowd gasped, their heads whipping back and forth between the general and the groom. Marcus swayed on his feet, his face turning an ash gray. Right at that moment, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A young man in a tactical, plainclothes suit stepped in. He was a junior operative from Meridian, a communications specialist who had driven up to the resort simply to hand-deliver a secure clearance renewal file to me, a quiet gesture of respect for my old squad. Seeing the situation, and recognizing the general taking command, the young operative marched straight down the center aisle. He bypassed the terrified Secret Service detail, walked directly to the stage, and handed a heavy black leather folio to General Vance. Vance ripped the folder open. He pulled out a stack of heavily redacted, official Black Book operational documents. They bore the unmistakable, terrifying seals of classified military intelligence. "You want to know about your self-made millionaire?" Vance's voice thundered through the speakers, dripping with absolute disgust. He threw the documents down onto the VIP table right in front of Chloe's billionaire father. "Read them. 3 years ago, your golden boy was drowning in cartel debt. He was hours away from a shallow grave in a foreign jungle. His entire real estate empire, the mansion, the supercars, the pedigree you just bought into, it is all built on a massive foundation of dirty money and lies. He only survived because the woman you just allowed your spoiled daughter to humiliate led an unauthorized raid to pull his architect out of a torture cell. She took the shrapnel. She took the blame. And she paid the $2 million cartel ransom herself just to keep him out of federal prison." The revelation hit the room like a tactical nuclear strike. The sheer magnitude of the deception was unfathomable. Chloe's father picked up the top document, his eyes scanning the official stamps and the horrifying incident reports. His hands began to shake violently. The illusion of the perfect, powerful son-in-law evaporated instantly, replaced by the sickening reality of a parasitic fraud who was heavily tied to international syndicates. Chloe's legs gave out completely. Her custom designer gown crumpled around her as she collapsed right there on the stage. The aristocratic mask she wore so proudly shattered into a million jagged pieces. She was not a queen. She was the punchline of a tragic, humiliating joke, legally bound to a pathetic liar. She let out a guttural, hyperventilating sob, burying her face in her hands as her perfectly curated world burned to the ground. The hired string quartet, who had been softly tuning their instruments in the background, abruptly stopped playing. The sudden absence of music made the silence even more agonizing. Down on the floor, Marcus realized there was nowhere left to hide. His fortress of lies was utterly annihilated. His knees buckled. He dropped heavily to the cold marble floor, right in front of the massive, ruined wedding cake. He buried his face against his hands, letting out a wretched, pathetic wail of pure, unadulterated panic. The grand, luxurious wedding had transformed entirely into a scene of absolute, devastating carnage, and I stood quietly in the corner, watching the empire of hypocrisy burn. The morning sun broke through the heavy cloud cover just after 7 o'clock. The brutal blizzard from the night before had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a blindingly bright, pristine landscape. The thick layers of ice clinging to the pine trees were already beginning to thaw, sending steady drops of water plunging into the snowbanks below. I pulled the handle of my sleek black suitcase, the wheels rolling smoothly across the luxurious carpets of the hotel corridors. When I stepped out of the elevator and into the grand lobby, the atmosphere was entirely unrecognizable. The sneering, arrogant energy that had choked the air yesterday was completely eradicated. Several guests from the reception were scattered around the plush velvet sofas, nursing hangovers and clutching cups of black coffee. The moment they heard the rhythmic click of my boots against the marble tiles, a profound, almost terrifying silence swept through the massive room. There were no more condescending whispers. There were no mocking glances. Instead, high society socialites and wealthy heirs actively stepped backward, giving me an incredibly wide berth. The hotel manager, who had practically ignored me at check-in, rushed forward to open the heavy glass doors for me, bowing his head in a display of absolute trembling reverence. I did not acknowledge them. They were ghosts to me now. I stepped out onto the grand driveway, taking a deep breath of the crisp, freezing mountain air. The sound of frantic, stumbling footsteps crunching rapidly through the melting snow broke the tranquility. It was Marcus. He looked utterly destroyed. The perfectly groomed, self-proclaimed titan of industry was gone. His expensive tuxedo shirt was untucked and violently wrinkled. His bow tie hung loosely around his neck, and his eyes were bloodshot and deeply sunken. He was gasping for air, clutching a small slip of paper in his violently shaking right hand. Nora, wait!" he pleaded, his voice cracking pitifully. He practically threw himself in front of me, holding out a hastily written bank check. "Please, just take this. It is $200,000. It is literally every single cent of liquid cash I could scrape together from my personal accounts overnight." Chloe's father called his lawyers at dawn. "She is filing for an annulment. They are pulling all their investments, Nora. They are going to completely ruin me. The company will be entirely liquidated by Friday. Please, you have to talk to the general. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Take the money. I beg you." I looked down at the fluttering piece of paper. $200,000. A pathetic fraction of what I had bled to cover, offered only when he had absolutely nothing else left to lose. I did not reach for it. Instead, I calmly reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a simple wooden matchbook. I struck a single match. The tiny flame flared brightly against the winter chill. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I reached out, pinched the corner of his trembling check, and touched the fire to the paper. Marcus gasped, his eyes wide with horror as the orange flame quickly devoured the bank logo, his signature, and the useless numbers. When the fire reached my fingertips, I simply let the charred, blackened remains flutter down onto the melting snow at our feet. "The debt from 3 years ago I paid with my own blood," I stated, my voice completely steady, devoid of any anger or sorrow. "And right now, I am buying back my absolute freedom with my final silence. You do not get to purchase my forgiveness with the loose change from your shattered empire. From this exact second forward, you have no sister. And I certainly do not need a family that has to wait for someone else to pin classified military medals on my chest before they suddenly figure out how to respect me." Right on cue, a massive, heavily armored black sport utility vehicle pulled up silently to the curb, its tinted windows completely impenetrable. The heavy door swung open, revealing the stoic face of the Meridian extraction driver. I turned my back on Marcus forever, stepping up into the secure, armored cabin of the vehicle. The door slammed shut with a heavy, definitive thud, severing my ties to the past. The powerful engine roared to life, and the vehicle accelerated smoothly down the winding mountain road, disappearing into the cold morning mist. I looked out the rearview window one last time. Marcus was completely collapsed on his knees in the slush, a broken man weeping over the ashes of a fake life he could not sustain, left alone in the ruins of a spectacular shattered wedding. I leaned my head back against the leather seat, closed my eyes, and let out a long, quiet breath. For the very first time in my entire 38 years of life, I smiled a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. The heavy, suffocating cage was finally gone. I was entirely free. Thank you so very much for listening to today's story. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? We would absolutely love to know in the comments below. If you found today's journey compelling and enjoyed the story, please consider helping us out. You can support our dedicated team with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your generous contribution allows us to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and empowering us to continue creating even better, more thrilling stories for you every single week. Stay strong, and we will see you in the next one.